is indeed darkness, save when there is urge. And all urge is blind, save when there is knowledge. And all knowledge is vain, save when there is work. And all work is empty, save when there is love. And when you work with love, you bind yourself to yourself and to others and to God. Khalil Gibran. I thought I would recite some poetry from Khalil Gibran because I am Lebanese. So I'm Dr. Ahmed Hankir. I identify as a wounded healer. So I'm both a mental health care professional, an NHS psychiatrist, and, wait for it, a mental health care receiver, a psychiatric patient. Now I realize that revelation may make some of you feel uncomfortable. And if it does, ask yourself why. You see, there's a perception that doctors should be invincible, but the reality is that we are human beings, we are fallible, and we are also vulnerable to developing mental health problems like everyone else. Now, stigma, as you can see on this, let's call it a banner, shall we? Transforming mental health stigma. Stigma and a culture of shame are formidable barriers to mental health care services, and consequently many people, especially doctors with mental health problems, continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. I really want to emphasize that point. Many people with mental health problems, people in this room today, continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. Now, if that was physical health, there would be outrage, but because it's mental health, there's a deafening silence. Now, I have felt the fire of stigma. I have felt the fire of stigma. And so I know firsthand how harmful and hurtful stigma can be. And so I have decided to dedicate and devote my life to challenging stigma and to raising awareness of the egregious effects of stigma. The consequences of stigma can be fatal. In other words, stigma is killing people. Stigma is killing people. Now is not the time to be quiet. We must do everything in our collective power to challenge stigma whenever and wherever we see it. So how do we do it? How do we challenge stigma? Studies show the most effective way of reducing stigma is when you make social contact with someone living with a mental health condition. Why? When you meet us, you discover that we have hopes and fears and vulnerabilities and strengths and dreams like everyone else. You discover that we are human beings. And so the evidence is clear. People living with mental health conditions have the power to reduce stigma and must spearhead anti-stigma campaigns. We have to harness the power of storytelling to reduce stigma and break down the barriers to mental health care. Okay, so this is my story. I like to think this is the moment you've all been waiting for, but I know I'm kidding myself. I've got a twin brother. He looks like me, dresses like me. Might be the next best thing, but he's not quite me. He's self-effacing, I'm self-aggrandizing. I'm a work in progress. I remember when I arrived in the UK from war-torn Lebanon. I was 17 years old. But before I took that flight, I was in Beirut International Airport and I had to say goodbye to my parents. And I don't care if this shattered my masculine bravado. We were all crying inconsolably There is no heart like a mother's heart, and there's no heart like my mother's heart, but Mama, what can I do? The situation back then in Lebanon was terrible. The situation now in Lebanon is terrible. Only a few years ago, we had the largest non-nuclear explosion in human history. More than 60% of people living below the poverty line, wandering the streets of Lebanon aimlessly. So I arrive in the UK and I naively believe that I'll just waltz into university, that I will be embraced by the academic community. But the reality was that I was a janitor cleaning floors in the morning, and I was a stock advisor stacking shelves in good old Marks and Sparks. And I did that for 70 hours a week. Calluses on my hands, evidence of my manual labor. And how did I feel? How does that make you feel? I was 17 years old. I was just a kid. My mind was still maturing. My brain was still developing. My heart was still growing. I didn't understand why when I was cleaning floors and I would say good morning to people, they wouldn't say good morning back to me. The following year, I enrolled into a sixth form college. And I said to the head of the sixth form at the time, it's my dream to become a doctor, and she laughed in my face. She laughed in my face and made me feel like I was this dirty little immigrant with delusions of grandeur. And she told me, she scoffed, she said, choose another course, you'll never become a doctor. How many youth of colour, how many younger people from disadvantaged backgrounds are time and again told or made to feel like they will never amount to anything in life? Now, being the sensitive soul that I am, her words hurt me. Her words hurt me a lot. But it didn't allow her to diminish my determination. So I continued to work full-time hours just to put a roof over my head and food in my stomach. And I had to prepare for the A-levels. And I'll never forget when the results were announced, we were walking in opposite directions in the corridor, her gaze was fixed on the floor. And I discovered that despite being in full-time employment, I received 100 out of 100 in my exams. All men dream, but not equally those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds, wake in the day to find that it was vanity, but the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dreams with open eyes to make them possible. This I did, the Lawrence of Arabia. I matriculated into Manchester Medical School. 3 years later, I woke up one morning to discover that my hometown in Lebanon was bombed. My nightmare turned into a reality. My world turned upside down. I saw harrowing and horrific images of dead bodies strewn on the streets of Lebanon, dead babies being removed from the rubble. That was my reality, and I feared that my family were among the dead. And I reacted. I developed a severe episode of psychological distress, of mental illness. But debilitating though the symptoms were, the stigma was far, far worse. When I needed care and compassion the most, I received ridicule and rejection instead. And in my despair, I contemplated ending that which is most precious, human life itself. But being a practicing Muslim, my faith deterred me from acting upon these seductive, suicidal thoughts. I was forced to interrupt my studies. I was rendered impoverished and hopeless, and yes, homeless. I slept on the cold and hot streets of Manchester. Now, I eventually sought informal support from my imam in my local mosque, and he urged me to seek professional help from an NHS psychiatrist, which is what I did. And together we co-produced a care plan. And I gradually recovered, and I resumed medical school with renewed determination and resilience. There is a fire burning in my belly and thunder in my heart to realize my potential and to make important and meaningful contributions to our world. And against all the odds, I qualified for medical school. But my journey had only just begun. I was inspired to work above and beyond the call of duty. I was humiliated for so long. And all the sacrifices and struggling and suffering paid off, because from leaving my family behind me in war-torn Lebanon, to getting into medical school, to being derailed, to being rendered impoverished and suicidal, this year, in 2022, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros himself, selected me. I was one of 6 people on this planet to receive the WHO Director General Award for Global Health. Thank you, God. Thank you so much. I gave my speech after Emmanuel Macron did. I have to admit, he does exude panache. He's a very charismatic chap. Now, the point I'm trying to make here, I'm not trying to boast, I'm not trying to brag. I'm just a humble slumdog. I'm just a boy from Beirut who came to this country with nothing. I left my family behind me. I came to this country with nothing. And I experienced severe psychological distress. But the point I'm trying to make is that, first of all, it's okay not to be okay. That having mental health problems is nothing to be ashamed about. And that recovery is a reality for the many and not for the few. And I invite you to stand in solidarity with us, to contribute to a cultural revolution that empowers and dignifies and humanizes people living with mental health conditions. Because if I can recover, other people out there living with mental health conditions can recover too. And that's such an important message of hope and recovery. I can't emphasize enough. We need to plant the seeds of hope into the hearts and minds of our children, of people suffering from mental health problems. Now that's why I can't thank Manju enough. And I can't emphasize enough. If you can, donate generously to her foundation. I'm a psychiatrist. Do you know what I'm seeing at 2 o'clock in the morning? It's heartbreaking. Suicidal children in a mental health crisis. We are bursting at the seams. We cannot meet the demand. We can't meet. There's a huge treatment gap. We just don't have the provision. So that's why we need to train volunteers to learn how to provide mental health first aid. And so please donate generously to this cause, because that donation can make the difference between someone living and someone dying. So thank you very much. I know I've been talking for a while now.